for three. And
goal! Bearcat Blitz. Thank you all for making us your choice on the podcast feed or on your YouTube feed, wherever you are checking us out. Thank you so much for calling our names. It is Bearcat Blitz. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He is my co-host, Neil Meyer. We'll bring in Neil in just a moment after we get through the ad break and a little preview of the show. Starting things off this week in a little bit of a down period for Bearcats athletics. We are presented by Bet Online. It's your number one source for the NBA Finals and Stanley Cup Finals this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150-plus slots games available. Head to the website today to get in on the action and use promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online. The game starts here. And we have plenty of things to get to on today's show. Summer workouts have begun for the Bearcats basketball team, and I saw the Bearcats football team getting some sprints and some non-padded workouts in at Nippert Stadium. So both programs staying fluid, staying ready, and obviously Bearcats basketball a little bit more in the news with all of the players getting back together on campus now. And we'll get to that along with maybe some potential kind of lost in translation. I don't know if there's a ton of smoke to this revelation that Florida State forward Jamir Watkins has Cincinnati among his final 6 schools. Maybe a situation where Jamir kind of not up to speed on how many spots Cincinnati has left, or Cincinnati may have enough NIL left that they are going after this kind of talent and just going to make them a walk-on because the roster's finalized at this point. They cannot force anybody else to enter the transfer portal. And then after that, we'll take a break and touch on Big-12 revenue reporting for 2023 and 24, the first payout for Cincinnati and their athletic program. We'll touch on that and kind of how it compares to what life they were living in the group of 5 as a member of the American Athletic Conference. All that coming up on today's Bearcat Blitz across the Believe Network, presented by Bet Online. The game starts here. We'll be back after these messages on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, welcome you in now as we get into this episode of BB on the Believe Network. Summer workouts getting going. We saw Seamus Lukosius in the Bearcats practice gym. Obviously, everybody back in the fold. Tim Buckley introduced officially as the South Carolina transfer. He's a transfer in his own right, coming over from the bench on South Carolina, fitting a similar role as an assistant at UC. Things just getting really exciting around Bearcats basketball amidst this Jamir Watkins story that we'll touch on in just a moment. But it feels like there won't be any more additions. Maybe this Watkins thing starts picking up some steam. Who knows? But with them finalizing the roster yesterday, tweeting out the jerseys, tweeting out the official social media, all that stuff, everybody back on campus, it seems like this is the team we're going to have pending a crazy kind of breaking news story with a guy like Jamir Watkins, who would make Cincinnati, in my opinion, a top 10 team nationally, joining this team late as arguably their best addition if it were to happen. But it feels like we're pretty much looking at the roster we're going to have for 24-25.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Russ. Obviously, I believe this is the roster that we'll be seeing for the 2024-2025 season, despite Jamir Watkins putting Cincinnati in his top 6 schools. But it's also worth noting, Russ, as well, that we even asked Wes Miller last week about maybe a potential late ad or something like that. And he was very adamant to say, unless they give us more scholarships, this is probably going to be the roster heading forward. And it could be one of those situations too, Russ. Obviously, we all know the transfer portal. It's hectic. It's very hectic. And I think everybody knows that. But it could have been one of those schools where Cincinnati potentially reached out to Jamir Watkins early in the process, and Watkins wasn't maybe aware of how many scholarships or whatnot were on this roster, but he had 5 other schools, including a potential return to Florida State in those top 6 schools. But it was definitely very interesting to see, say, per the least, I guess we can say, obviously, once the tweet came out from John Rothstein, we were pretty, I think a lot of people were caught off surprise and was kind of questioning what that meant. But I think it's safe to say, Russ, that this roster is set, especially after how they tweeted out the social media tags, the jersey numbers. I think it's safe to say that this is the roster. But if they were able to find a way to use some NIL money or whatever it is to be a walk-on, that'd be interesting. But right now, I don't see that happening. I think right now this is the roster that is set for this upcoming 2024-2025 season.
We're parallel in that thinking, Neil. It's just a little too late in the process. And I noted in the story reporting the kind of news that John Rothstein broke that elite players in today's college basketball, you can walk on at certain programs and you can have your finances in terms of your school tuition, all that stuff paid for by NIL on top of getting the NIL salary that you're getting paid for your actual play, so to speak. We saw that with with Cormani McClain with Florida. Went down there and was reportedly a walk-on in that situation. So that's in football, obviously a little bit different, but it's rare, Neil, obviously, and it has not happened at Cincinnati. And for a program at Cincinnati that I wouldn't say it's lacking in NIL funds, Neil, but it's not necessarily throwing around the kind of money at the top level of the sport that we're seeing get thrown around. It would be pretty surprising if we saw Jamir Watkins walk on here, knowing that the only way he will walk on is if they are able to pay for his NIL contract on top of the NIL covering his tuition and all that stuff. It just seems like a lot to ask. And especially it must have been a loss in translation thing, Neil. It had to have been. I'm sure there aren't it would be nice for the kids if this was happening, but I'm sure not every school, once they sign a player, they don't immediately go to their target that they were targeting and say, hey, we signed this guy. You should go ahead and take us off your list. There's just too much stuff going on, Neil, for that to be happening in all these situations. And it might be a little bit of a lost in translation situation right there. But one thing to take away from that final 6, Neil, is when we look at who he had on his final rankings. St. John's, Rick Pitino. Michigan, brand new coach, Dusty May. They look like they're on the up and up. They're probably going to be ranked in the preseason top 25. Florida State, perennially a powerhouse in the ACC. Oregon, perennially contending for NCAA tournament spots. Kansas State, we know how they stand in the Big-12 in recent years under Jerome Tang. Neil, this is the exact type of thing we've been talking about all spring long, contending and playing in these big game hunting waters with some of the premier programs in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned the schools right there. Obviously, Dusty May, new coach at Michigan, still might have a couple roster spots open. Jerome Tang and Kansas State definitely still have a couple roster spots open after losing a guy like Arthur Kaluma, who tested the draft waters, is back in the portal. But a couple other schools, a potential return to Florida State, Oregon out there in the Pac-12. It's going to be interesting, Russ, and I think it's just, as we mentioned, one of those lost in translation things. But it definitely was interesting. But as college hoops and people who cover college athletics like yourself and myself, it's pretty interesting to see something like this come out this late into the process. But it definitely was something that was lost in the translation for me. But it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be in a Cincinnati jersey, despite even if it's a walk-on. I just don't think we will see a guy like Jamir Watkins in a Cincinnati jersey.
What a walk-on he would be, man. 6'7", 210 pounds, multiple seasons of starting experience,
especially
33 games. Yeah, go ahead.
On the fact of him potentially coming here as a walk-on, you'll have to cover his tuition and all that. We saw the NIL deal that just busted with Jaden Rashada down at Florida. That would be a tricky landscape as well to kind of really, how do you go around this? Like, he's not on scholarship, but we'll pay for your schooling. All that stuff, it could get hairy, it could get messy. There's a lot of gray areas still within the NIL landscape. So that's another factor to consider as well.
Yeah. I mean, It'd be pretty sweet if he
It
became a
would be
Bearcat.
sweet, but
It would be very sweet. It would be. I mean, I would be hard pressed to find any reason why they wouldn't be a top 10 team. 15.6 rebounds, 15.6 points per game last year, 6 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 45.7% from the field, 34.4% from deep on 3 shots per game. I mean, he would immediately give you a bona fide 2-way, just impact forward that you could make your top 6-man option, or he'd probably end up starting for sure. I mean, I would be shocked if he didn't start if he chose Cincinnati. So it's a long shot. We don't think it's actually going to happen. It seems like the roster is definitely set with a top 20, top 25 team right now, but they would be a definite top 10 contender with a guy like Jamir Watkins in the fold. And some numbers that are going to help Cincinnati keep getting guys and keep getting talents interested like Dylan Mitchell and Jamir Watkins is these Big 12 revenue. Neil and I breaking that down after this break on Bearcat Blitz. Back half of Bearcat Blitz coming your way right now on the Believe Network. We're presented by Bet Online. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He's my co-host, Neil Meyer. And one other thing I wanted to note before we wrap up kind of the full basketball discussion. Obviously, we did get we actually got a game date, Neil, for the Dayton matchup against the Flyers in the neutral site bouts in December at Heritage Bank Center. It's going to happen on December 20th is when they will be facing the Dayton Flyers. And looking at my calendar here, December 20th is a Friday night. I think right after the Bengals play the Browns on Thursday Night Football. So,
and then the conference kicks off short. What is that? 10 days later, if it's kicking off on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. So
yeah,
it's going to be
one
of the last
interested to
games
see if
in non-conference slate.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they schedule like a week break between the end of the non-con and the conference schedule. But they have that date.
You mentioned that too, Russ, about maybe scheduling that break, because for those who don't remember, there is no break in conference play this year. There is no bye week, so
they're gonna schedule a break. Neil, it would be shocking if they don't give them a week off of games.
Yeah, absolutely,
conference
absolutely
and
shocking.
I would honestly think, I'd borderline on calling it malpractice if they don't give them a week off, because it's just like once again, as we've talked about the non-conference, it's not the issue it was last year. You have enough strength in that non-conference slate already to give yourself some cupcakes, especially at the end of that non-con, and give yourself a little bit of breathing room to just, if there's some nagging injuries at that point in the season, which there almost always is, give yourself a little bit of extra time to recover, all that good stuff. But December 20th is the game date they have landed on. And so going through the non-conference dates so far, we have home against Morehead State on November 8th, at Northern Kentucky on November 13th, at Villanova on December 3rd, home against Xavier on December 14th, and then 2 undefined games left on the docket that we know about for sure, at Georgia Tech and home against Howard. Those, according to me, latest that I know, do not have game dates yet. And the neutral site action against Dayton, Neil, which news last week got a little bit easier for the Bearcats on paper, because Dayton Flyers forward Deron Holmes staying in the NBA draft and will not be an opponent for the Bearcats this coming season. I don't know how I feel about that. If you're a Bearcats fan, how you should feel about that. You kind of, on one hand, he was a massive problem for the Bearcats last year. He scored almost 30. He almost had a 30 and 15 double-double.
Yeah, it was like a crazy double-double performance. But also, it's worth noting that Aziz Bandaogo got hurt in the first 90 seconds of that matchup and played through what we now found out later to be a pretty significant back injury. So,
and that was his second or third game back from the eligibility issues. So, but a little bit of a different animal that Deron Holmes will be facing this year if he were to.
Yeah, but expect Dayton to be a very tough team though as well. Obviously, despite losing a guy like Kobe Bray to Kentucky, they lose Deron Holmes to the NBA. But they still have one of the best recruiting class, a top 25, top 30 recruiting class. Anthony Grant does a fantastic job. It's still going to be a quad 1 or a quad 2 matchup, even without Deron Holmes there. But overall, I'm excited for that matchup, Russ. Hopefully this time it's a little bit more not baby blue in Heritage Bank Arena, because for those who remember, the Flyers fans, it felt like they took over.
It was flooded.
It was flooded. Heritage Bank Center last year, right? And Russ, you covered that game, but you were on the opposite end of where we were on the baseline. But
yeah, you guys were right in front of the Dayton
right
band.
In front of the Dayton band, and it was safe to say they had the student section behind it. Yeah, their support system at that game last year was unlike any other. So hope to see a little bit more red this year than they at Heritage Bank Center for sure.
Yeah, like this should be a split matchup. It's a matchup that I hope they do every year. And if it's going to be a neutral site affair, which I don't understand why they're doing it this way, make it a home and home every year. That's way more fun, way more interesting, way more fun for us to cover, to get to go to those two environments, get to cover the UD Arena environment. I would love to do that one day. But if you're going to make it like this, give the UC fans as much access to these tickets, make it as prominent as possible in the social medias that, hey, we need to match the UD faithful out here. If you're a Bearcats fan thinking that way. Big 12 revenue. Let's get to it right now. Commissioner Yormark talked to the media at Big 12 meetings last week, revealed the 2023-24 revenue distribution, $470 million, Neil, to its 14 members last season. And according to our old colleague on the beat, Justin Williams, now on the big national beat with The Athletic, 10 of the original Big 12 members are getting roughly $39.8 million each. That's Texas and Oklahoma included on their last year out of the conference. And that split is actually down from last year's split of $44 million because of the 4 new schools that got added, BYU, UC, Houston, UCF, who are only getting $18 million this year. Will get $19 million in 25, Neil. And then whatever the full pot split among the, what would that be? 16 teams? Yeah, 16 teams in 2026, or excuse me, 16 teams in 2027. Whatever that full split is, they'll just get that fully split 16 ways, I believe. That's how it ends up working with these schools, Neil. The schools coming from the group of 5 having to pay a little bit of a delayed tax, so to speak, on full access to the revenue distribution. Kind of, I'm guessing just because they were smaller schools. And when you look at schools coming from the Pac-12, they get full access to the revenue allotment starting this year, if I'm not mistaken, because that's just kind of the deal they worked out. They were a little bit more sought after from the other schools, other conferences around the country. So you get those advantages. But Neil, this is almost, we were talking before the show. It's hard to find defined revenue numbers that they got from the AAC in their final year, but I'm almost 1,000% sure it's safe to say it was less than $10 million in revenue streams from the media deal there with the AAC. Much different revenue stream and a much different revenue lifestyle in the Big 12. Almost double. They're not even getting full access, Neil, and they're basically
doubling. Yeah, it's crazy because as you mentioned, Russ, you and I talked about it before the show. We've seen reports of anywhere from, I believe it was like 8.5 to just under 10 million per year in the final year of the group of 5. And now you look at it this year, you see they're getting 18 million in year 1, 19 in year 2, and then they're back to the full pot. So overall, $18 million in year 1.
By 27, you'd guess what, Neil, is hovered around, I would guess around 50 to 55 million, maybe 60 million, with how many just relentless pulling out the stops mentality. How much of that mentality is there from Rhett Yormark in this conference saying, we're trying to make as much money as possible any way we can, i.e., the breaking news last night from John Rothstein, no more long scorers table on Big 12 basketball home games. They're going to start selling the seats next to each bench as Hollywood level seats like we see in the NBA. Why are they doing that, Neil? Because any way you can squeeze new revenue out, you got to try to do it in today's college athletics landscape, especially when you're not a part of the Big 10 and SEC revenue streams.
Yeah, and it's a great thing you mentioned that too, Russ, because as Brett Yormark stated when he first took the Big 12 commissioner job, is that the Big 12 was going to be open for business. And that it's a great example of that, because in year 1, the revenue splits, I saw up hand and personal at the Big 12 tournament, no floor media level seats. That was all premier seating, premier suites and whatnot for extra fans to buy out those tickets, which was personally, I thought it was pretty cool, a unique experience. I didn't think some games had a bigger crowd than some, but overall, they're finding ways to attract fans. to these events and putting those seats right there, those Hollywood level style seats, I think it's a great opportunity. The long scores table, you can get your donors, you can get your boosters, you can get your season ticket holders, rotate them in and out, whatever it might be, or the case or the situation. You can get them right up close, an experience that they haven't had before. Right there, they get to hear alongside the bench the plays. They get to see it up close and personal instead of being back a little bit. It's kind of one of those, in a sense, like you can hear everything where you're at now and you can kind of see it, but up close and personal, you might be able to see things and hear things a little differently and might be able to take in the game at another aspect compared to what you were maybe 20 feet back. But I think it's perfect, Russ, and Brett Yormark is doing a fantastic job at finding ways to create revenue for this conference. And I mean, look at what he's done from year 1 to year 2 and now heading into year 3 under Commissioner Yormark. I think it's fantastic because you're looking at what he's doing and he's all about trying to find as much revenue as possible. He's keeping the Big 12 conference tournament out in Kansas City through 2021 or 2031, just extended the media rights deal through, I believe, 2031, right? If I remember right. So he's doing everything
through the decade, I'm pretty sure, for sure.
Yeah, he's doing everything in his power to really put the Big 12 on a national stage and say, hey, we're here to stay. We're here to compete. Let's do this. Let's get money for this conference. And he's proven to shown why the Big 12 is arguably one of the best conferences in all of college athletics. So it's very interesting to say and kind of watch it unfold here throughout his tenure as Big 12 commissioner.
It would be a hard argument to make that Big 12 isn't the third healthiest conference in the country right now. It would be a very difficult argument in my eyes to make against that, just given the strife with Florida State and the ACC and what could happen there. And overall, just to clarify, I want to make sure $18 million this year UC got. They get $19 million in 2025, and then it goes to the even revenue split among all schools in 2026. Just more and more money coming in, more and more opportunities for Cincinnati to answer the bell. And Neil, so far, John Cunningham has, I would say, passed thus far with his coaching hires. Jordan Bishel. We didn't talk much Bearcats baseball this season, but they keep playing like they are. We'll be talking about them in ensuing seasons. First 30-plus win year this decade. They were 18-8 at home. Yeah, since 2019. I mean, he did a great job in his first year in the Big 12, narrowly missed out on an NCAA tournament appearance. Wes Miller has taken a program that had 2 players on the entire roster, 2 guys that even wanted to play for the team 4 years ago, to the best, most talented roster this program's had in the past 10, 15, maybe 20 years. And on the precipice of a top 25 ranking going into the year and widely expected to make the NCAA tournament. And then Scott Satterfield, only 1 year so far, inherited a rough talent pool from Luke Fickell. It was a lot worse than I think people really want to give credit to. And he's trying to build that thing back up with expectations of a bowl. I mean, if he hits those bowl expectations this year, Neil, 6, 7, 8 wins, it's just going to be more evidence to why John Cunningham should be getting strong respect for these coaching hires and the direction of this athletics program in general. UC athletics overall should be viewed very highly. And I mean, I need to mention Katrina Merriweather as well. UC women's program, they're on their way up. They're signed a 5-star talent. The class of 2025.
Recruit in UC history.
There you go. And what helps that? Recruiting money, recruiting resources, and you get that from increased revenue. So great stuff from the Big 12 in 2023-24. A lot of fun covering it. We're going to have a lot of fun covering 2024 and 25 right here on Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online. We are coming at you on the Believe Network over the ensuing summer months and beyond, 2 times a week, all the way through 2024. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. We'll talk to you again on Friday.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a 3. Yes!